I'm the Head of Communications and Advocacy for the DPC. I'd like to welcome you to the first episode in our Digital Preservation Features mini-series. Today we're going to hear from Phil Clegg and Phil Ogden from MirrorWeb, who are going to talk to us about MirrorWeb and what they offer. And they are going to be joined by Tom Storer of the National Archives, who is going to talk to us about his own experience, or the National Archives' own experience, of identifying a requirement and then engaging with MirrorWeb solutions. So I'd like to just take a moment or two just to talk about the series and why we're doing this. So every year we hold what we call our Connecting the Bits Annual Members Unconference, and this year we're adding Digital Preservation Features, a community forum which involves our DPC supporters too. So these are the two most important events on the calendar which allow members to let us know about the challenges they're facing, the support they need over the next year, and any views they have on the way we do things. So with the membership larger and more diverse and more dispersed than ever before, we now have 82 members across the world. We're really excited at the opportunity to hear about the digital preservation challenges that such a diverse bunch of organisations are facing. However, gathering together such a diverse and dispersed group of organisations is a challenge in itself. Around a quarter of our members now have their bases outside the UK and Ireland, but even regardless of that, regardless of where they're based, work commitments and travel budgets are getting tighter and tighter, so we know that not everybody is going to be able to join us in Glasgow next week. So this series of supporting webinars is designed to help members engage with the process of feedback and communication that Connecting the Bits and Digital Preservation Features provides. So just to kind of put it in context, this week we're going to hear from our supporters in a series of 3 webinars. We're going to hear what they're doing now and how that relates to future plans. We're going to ask members what their priorities are for a digital preservation solution so that the supporters can go away and work that into their own plans. For those who can come next week, we'll meet in Glasgow for the live events. For those unable to attend, we're going to email out the key themes and challenges which arise from the discussions there. So there'll be an opportunity to respond and take part in the discussion remotely that way. And then after that, we're going to have 2 final webinars, one with all of our supporters again, where we discuss next steps and plans for the next 12 months, and another where you'll hear just from us at the DPC on the plans that we have for our events, our activities, publications, campaigns, all the things that are going to support members through the next year. So I hope that provides a bit of context and explains a bit of the thinking behind the series. I've probably been speaking far too long now, so I'm going to hand straight over to Phil, who's going to start us off with an introduction to MirrorWeb and what it is that they do and how they do it.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Right, well, obviously we're MirrorWeb. I'm here with Phil, and I'm Phil too, just to confuse things. But Phil will come in and probably on the Q&A, but I'll run through this agenda, and then I'll be bringing Tom Storer in from the National Archives a little bit further into these slides. So just a brief run through of the agenda. We'll have a little discussion about who we are and what we do for those who haven't heard of us before. What our offering is in terms of what we offer to our customers. Some of the work we're doing and some of the challenges we are working with various different, like the DPC and the IIPC. And then some future discussion around the future challenges that we see coming up within the web and social media archiving community. So without further ado, I'll get started. So MirrorWeb. MirrorWeb is a web and social media archiving provider, predominantly providing services to public sector with a leaning into the commercial sector within the compliance-driven organisations. We provide a private web portal that allows our customers to manage their archives, manage their social media, and interact with it, search, and interrogate it. For our public sector customers, like the National Archives and like the UK Parliament, we also provide a public-facing web and social media platform where the public can interrogate, in the National Archives case, 20 years of web archives and a very large Twitter and YouTube archive. Our platform is predominantly built on the cloud, and as a result, I think we're the only web and social media archiving platform that is cloud-based, and that has given us the ability to to do some interesting experiments and do some things in a bit of a different way than would have been the way you would have done it with a traditional data center model. Examples of this have been able to index data for search very rapidly by running huge fleets of servers in the thousands, whereas in the past you would have only had small clusters within data centers. So that's a quick overview of what we've done. So our technology allows us to, as I say, to create website archives across the whole UK government web archive sector and across all of our different clients. We also focus on compliance within the financial sector, where companies need to prove that what they said on their websites at any particular time. And we also provide archives for companies that wish to preserve data for a historical value. So, what are our customers looking for? I think the best way of answering this is to bring in Tom at this stage and to explain how they put together the tender that we ended up winning and what areas they were looking for in terms of the ability for MirrorWeb to provide web and social media archiving. So, Tom, are you there? Or bring you in?
I am. Yes. Hi, Phil. Hi, everyone. So yeah, as Phil says, we've been in the contract with under contract with MirrorWeb now since last July. So it came up to the year mark. Just to give you a bit more background about the National Archives. So we have quite a lot of experience building and managing a large web archive. We are at the National Archives. We are the UK official archive of government. So we have a web archive that goes back some 20 or so years. It's about 140 terabytes in size, and it's somewhere between, I think now, between 4.5 and 5 billion objects in total. So we used our experience to come up with the 4 categories that you can see on the screen at the moment. So capture, access, search, and preserve, and preservation. So I'll just briefly go through each one of these. We were essentially looking for a full state-of-the-art service when we went out to tender a couple of years ago. And I should mention at the top also that for those of you who are interested in reading the full requirements, they're still public domain on the Contract Finders website, and I can circulate that later. I just wanted to ask, can everyone hear me okay? I'm getting some strange noises on the phone.
Perfect at the moment.
Is that okay?
Yeah,
okay.
No problem.
Sounds fine.
Okay. Great. Thanks. So, right, first of all, capture. So as the official archive of government, we're really keen on quality. So it's essential that we can archive content in extremely high fidelity, that we can provide really vigorous quality assurance processes to that content, and we can do it in a way that's very responsive to the changing sort of environment, if you like, on the web. So government creates lots of websites that also retires content on the web, and it's essential that we capture these things in a very timely manner. So one of our central requirements was to be able to capture this content rapidly, accurately, and to really, really high fidelity. So to the second point, access. We're a selected web archive, and we're also an open archive. Because of our status as the National Archive, we're able to give open access to the information that we capture, which means that we're actually providing an online service, as Phil mentioned in his introduction, to millions of users. It's really crucial. It's been really crucial for us to be able to reliably do that What's also been important to us is the ability to gradate the access system that we have. So, for example, on occasion, some content in the archive needs to have access restricted for a period of time. For example, if content has been published in error, we need to be able to take that down immediately. So that was another criteria. Search is a big one. Searching across such a large corpus is always going to be a challenge. So we specified that we needed to be able to index all of the content. We needed to have a effective deduplication in place. And we also needed it to be obviously a good user experience at the end of it. I think Phil, you can correct me here, but I think we currently have about 310 million documents in the search index. It's
actually a quite nice number. It's 333 million.
Right, 333 million. So there you go. And then of course, preservation. So we're the National Archives, so we're of course crucial in preserving all of these things, not just the work files, not just the raw content, but also the content that provides additional context to the collection. So crawler logs, metadata about what quality checks have been performed, and so on. So all these factors at a high level formed our requirements. Okay, I think that's my bit.
Okay, thank you for that, Tom.
Okay, good.
So I think we'll just, I'll play this video. Now, I think when we tested this, it was a bit jerky, but you'll be able to hear what John was saying. This is John, the Digital Director of the National Archives. Just a little clip. If you want to see more of this, I think we've got it on our website.
So one of the things that I've been most impressed by is MirrorWeb's use of cloud computing technologies to index the entirety of our 120 terabyte collection. They were able to spin up a 1,000 node plus cluster to process the entirety of that collection, really in just a couple of days.
So yeah, as John was saying, I'll go into it a bit more, because what we did around search was an experiment, and it worked really well. Traditionally, to do search, you would spin up a big data or Hadoop cluster, and you would push all the data through it, and your cluster's only a certain size. It takes a certain amount of time. We set ourselves a challenge of trying to do a search index, and maybe I should explain what a search index is. If you've got a Word document and you want to go to search it, you take the text out and you put it into a search engine, and then you're able to search and pull that text out. If you've got a PDF document, you do the same. If you've got a HTML document, you pull out the text that's relevant, and you put that into a search engine, and then it points back to the document that contains the stuff you've been searching for. So we had about 1.4 billion documents that were in scope, of which a number of them are duplicates, and as Tom mentioned, we ended up with about 333 million unique documents in the search index. Using the cloud, we were able to build a search platform that allowed us to scale horizontally, which meant that we could just keep adding more and more servers to the system. And actually, the limitation was actually the search system that it was all going into. If we added too many servers, we would have taken it down. But we were able to index the whole National Archives 150 terabyte data set in just 10 hours. And that blew away the records that everyone else had set using traditional Hadoop clusters. So that was one of the ways we were able to deliver, and how we've innovated using cloud technology. Being cloud native has allowed us to build out a platform quite differently, and there's some stuff I'll be coming to later about how we're going to give some of that back to the community, some of the software we developed. We also have a user-friendly portal, which unfortunately I don't have a picture of in this slide, but if anyone's interested, we get in touch, we can give you access and you can have a look at. I think we'll move on because the time is. So what are the future challenges? some of the future challenges we've got is the web is changing, and where in the past there was a lot of open standards, open platforms around like email, we're now moving into things where we've got more proprietary closed platforms that we can't access, or if we can access, we need to write innovative software to get to. So that's one of the challenges we've got, and that's just a conversation point. We can help with some of it, but there are other areas, for example, like messaging on the closed messaging platforms like Apple's iMessage, which we can't get into because it's encrypted end to end. So moving on, future challenges, it's the same thing. The millennials are starting to use social media predominantly. Things like Snapchat, very, very difficult to archive because the messages just get deleted as they travel. Other areas like Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, we can archive those, but they do require constantly keeping up with the changing APIs. Recently, with all the Facebook issues that have been going out, Facebook changed and cut out a lot of access to their APIs, limiting what could be archived. So that was a constant challenge and constant innovation and moving around that. Then we've got the web. A lot of websites are still very archivable with traditional archiving platforms, but some modern sites are starting to use a lot of heavy JavaScript that runs in user's browser. And the traditional Heritrix archiver doesn't emulate a browser, and so as a result, you can't archive those pages.
I wanted to put this.
For example, you wouldn't be able to archive Google Maps because all of the code runs actually in the browser that makes that work. So that is a challenge, and that's an area that the whole community does need to come together and work out how we're going to get around that. And then finally, this data access storage. These things are they get really big. I think we're currently storing about 0.5 petabyte of data for the National Archives and our other customers, and that's just growing daily. And the cloud gives us the ability to scale that we wouldn't have had in the traditional data center model. In the past, getting a petabyte of data stored in a data center would be very, very expensive. So, how can the challenges be met? I think the community needs to come together, and we need to work together to create open source projects that do allow people to develop them together. And I think really it is about connecting and discussing and having things like this webinar where we can have questions be asked and we can explore new ideas. So community engagement. We are obviously we're in Glasgow next week, so if anyone wants to discuss this further, we'll be able to talk there. We're sponsoring the ARA Records in August, and then we'll be at the sponsor at the IIPC event in New Zealand in November. So I mentioned that we were going to give some bits back. We're working on a project that we used within our search indexing technology, which allowed very, very rapid extraction of text from a variety of different document types. And it's still in development at the moment, but it is a project that we want to give to the community. It did allow us to do things at the rapid speed that we did the indexing. And I think at one of the events, probably in New Zealand at the IIPC event, we'll make that available. We've also made a lot of changes to PyWB. Now, PyWB is the replay engine that we use to replay the web archives for the National Archives. And that's an open source project that was developed by a community member well known in the IIPC, Ilya Kramer. But we've made significant changes to it, and we've been working with Ilya to push them back into the community. So I think that's probably enough from me. I think it's about time to pass it out to the audience and see if there's any questions.
So I can take it over from there. Thank you very much, Phil, for that. I last heard from MirrorWeb, must have been a couple of years ago, so it's been really great to see how MirrorWeb has grown and sort of responded to sort of new projects and new developments in web archiving. So before I launch in, as you sort of opened up the floor for questions, is there anybody on the call or anyone who's just joined who either wants to ask a question about some of the content that was covered or has any other burning questions, maybe surrounding their own web archiving?
Hi, it's Jen Mitchum here.
Hi, Jen.
I had probably an unfair question, which is how much does it cost? And I suspect that the answer might be it depends. But it is useful to get a kind of an idea of what it might cost for a small institution.
It really will. I mean, it does depend, unfortunately, on how big the data set is. I mean, are you talking one website? Are you talking multiple websites, or?
I'm talking a handful of websites. So, I mean, nothing. What you've described here is really, it's impressive, and it's obviously working at a really, really big scale. But I just want to kind of start out with web archiving. We've probably got about 4 websites we might want to archive, and I'd like to understand all the options and all the costs.
Okay. Well, I can give you some rough ideas. I mean, if for our financial clients, we archive every day because they have a compliance need, and obviously that's quite expensive. If you've only got a requirement to archive once a year, then the price would be significantly less. If you wanted to archive once a month, and the site was a tiny site, then it wouldn't be in the matter in terms of size. Yeah, in size, in terms of not necessarily number of pages, but the size that it costs us to store it and the time it takes to archive it. It might be within the hundreds of pounds, or it might be within the thousands. It really does depend on the size of the site, because it's the length of time that we have to run service for and the amount of storage we've got. So size of site, frequency of archiving, and that sort of dictates cost.
Okay.
This is Phil Ogden, Jen. The other advantage to obviously using cloud technology is that we're not obviously holding huge amounts of storage on our client's behalf. So we're only really spinning up the amount of storage that we need by project, and therefore we can pass that back to you significant savings. Possibly the easiest way for us to be able to demonstrate it for you specifically, and maybe anybody else that's on the line that's interested, is if you contact us after, I can put a demo archive together. We can actually then physically look at the size of the archive, and we can give you a very, very specific quote in terms of what that would cost. And you'll probably be quite surprised in terms of how cost effective it actually is. And the reason why we're hopefully giving you a direct answer, even though it sounds slightly indirect, is that because we can do things at speed on the cloud, we can actually see how big the archive requirement is and give you a very, very accurate price rather than being very sort of broad brush strokes. But from what you were saying, to reiterate what Phil was saying, you would probably be in more in the hundreds of pounds, probably frequency-wise and size-wise, and probably very, very cost-effective in the way that we could probably provide a service for you.
That's great, thanks. That makes me feel quite optimistic that this might be affordable for us.
I'm sure we can make it affordable for you.
Thanks, Jen. I don't know if anyone's been. Sorry, is there someone? I'm getting my own voice on a reverb. Anyway, so there's a question in the chat box that you've been following, Phil, and so that's from William, about whether you find it's a challenge for yourselves or for your client organizations in persuading executives that social media in particular represents a record that should be preserved.
In the past it has been. I think there's been recent changes, certainly within the financial sector, that have mandated that social media is actually a messaging platform that needs to be archived. There's new MiFID II regulations have come into force in Europe now, and they do dictate that all digital messaging is archived. So that's made life a bit easier. We are doing some social media archiving for other customers who recognise that actually it's the digital history, and it is getting lost. So I think people's mindsets are changing around it, but it is still a challenge. I don't know if you've got anything on that, Phil.
The one thing that I was just trying to find the chat box. So can you just repeat the question, because I was distracted. Sorry.
Yeah, so the question is in the chat box to everyone, but he is asking if there is, or if you found it to be a challenge for yourselves or for your client organization in persuading.
Yeah,
sorry?
I mean, obviously, I think it's part of what we were talking about before, the earlier challenges. I think that, we all forget how small a amount of time in the overall sort of spectrum of digital evolution we are, and the new world order around social media is hitting us before we've even got to grips with website archiving in principle. So the short answer would be yes, in principle. but it is being helped by the whole social evolution, where most people, if you think about where they're spending media and where they're trying to interact with customers, now they're all adopting these channels. And by default, these channels, therefore, then, because of the way that they are amazingly flexible and open, provide also the need for us to be able to sometimes monitor those. But also, I think, as Phil was saying, we're finding a lot more organisations now are looking at archiving the social platforms as a record of heritage and how they could look back on how they were interacting with customers, from everything from a marketing perspective right the way through to a curation and preservation of the history and evolution of a brand.
Yeah, and I just to clarify, do you mainly work with clients who are interested in archiving their own corporate record history? So I know TNA, for instance, has quite a tight limitation on their collecting policy for social media to only the sort of outgoing tweets and YouTube material output by the government agencies and not replies and things. Is that sort of true of most of the organizations you've worked with so far?
We've got a pretty broad spectrum now. There are organisations that are looking exactly as you said, but there are other organisations that are actually now taking it even a step further, where they're actually looking at not only their brand social media, but what other people are talking about in the market, and they can use that either from a business intelligence perspective or a brand authority perspective, and it's becoming much more of a broad church in terms of what we're being asked to look at and collect.
So does MirrorWeb kind of provide a little bit of sort of input in terms of what you're willing to archive? Because there are, of course, privacy issues, GDPR restrictions, as well as platform terms and conditions that limit what can be collected and how it can be preserved. As I know, Twitter's API developer agreement for a while had a restriction about sharing data collected through an API, that the wording of it did actually restrict preserving content in the cloud. So, I mean, it sort of depends on how strict of an interpretation you want to have of those requirements. But is that something you advise clients on, or do you expect them to have a collecting policy that they ask you to collect something and they've already done that work of deciding what risk they're willing to take on in terms of meeting those either platform terms and conditions or privacy issues?
You are correct around that, and I have had conversations with Twitter around that particular policy, because it does limit what we can do.
Mm-hmm.
We are doing archives for a big media company in the UK, and Twitter won't allow us to pass the archives over to them, so they can only view them through our platform. It does seem a bit backwards. Some of the other social media platforms are much more understanding around it. So LinkedIn has a very tight policy, but they do understand the need for archiving within financial services for compliance. Around the other question, we certainly in the GDPR sense, we're a data processor, not the data controller. So we do pass that back to the customer.
Okay.
It has to be like that. That's based on the GDPR. And then in terms of archiving stuff, that we wouldn't be archiving sort of private messages that don't belong to people who are asking us to archive a Twitter feed, for example. We wouldn't have access to it. But some of the Twitter stuff, it is in the public sector, and if we were asked to archive a public Twitter channel, then we could. I can't say we haven't been asked to do that just yet. Other examples in terms of the financial industry, we have certain customers who ask us to archive certain sections of other customers' websites for compliance purposes, because their products are actually being sold through that particular page. So, for example, in the insurance industry, you might have a company that provides life insurance, but then a third-party company that they have a relationship with is selling that insurance product through their own website, but they don't have any control of the wording that's written on that site, and they need an archive to make sure that the wording does match what it should be from a compliance point of view. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. Obviously, different sectors sort of approach the issue of privacy issues in social media posts quite differently. There are certainly a huge subsect of people who believe that because, for instance, Twitter is just the easy example, because Twitter is this perceived as being a public forum and people understand that their tweets are public, that there's justification there for harvesting and preserving tweets that are in the public domain. But of course, then you run into some problems of Twitter's sort of user agreement that promises not to share deleted tweets and deleted accounts. And if you've already harvested those tweets and tweets by deleted accounts, that can be very problematic and expensive to ensure that you're no longer holding those, sort of depending on sort of how strictly you're following that and how likely that data is to be shared. All the way to the other end of sort of social science researchers who would argue that just because Twitter is perceived as a public forum, that most users aren't going to be aware that their tweets, even if it's in a public domain, are being used for something other than just the Twitter conversation that they're interacting in. But again, I think that really depends on how likely you think your data collections are to be shared or reused in other ways. But yeah, certainly.
For Twitter, we're not able to share the data. They've made that very clear, and unfortunately that's where we stand.
Sure.
The nature.
That's where everybody stands.
You what, sorry?
Yeah, that's where everybody stands. So.
Yeah. So I've had good conversations with them around this topic, but they're not budging on it. So we'll see. They may get more flexible, they may not, because they don't really have a proper compliance program yet. So we just have to archive it and store it and not pass it on.
Sure. And just to say, we'd be interested in, to whatever extent you're happy to share, hear your progress with Twitter. We have a little bit of insight from sort of the research sector and their interactions with Twitter, but of course they've sort of got this academic, non-commercial interest, so their relationship is quite different. And any way that DPC, in our sort of advocacy role, can either help with that or promote that, please do let us know.
Could you just tell it? Sorry, to sound a bit rude, but we've got you. I think we've got you as caller 3 on the log. We don't. Can you just tell us who it is so we can get back to you and share it?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?
Yeah. Can you just tell us which member it is that we're speaking to? We've just got you up as an ID on here as caller. It's just got a caller user 3.
Oh, I appear as myself on my view. I work for the DPC, so I am Sarah Day Thompson, the research officer here.
Got it. Yeah. I think you're off the screen on Phil's screen. That's why I can't see your little flashing.
All right. Okay. Thank you. I didn't realize. Yes, everybody, it's Sarah Day Thompson from the DPC. I apologize. I didn't realize I was anonymous.
No, we've got you then. Sorry, it's my fault.
I retroactively take ownership for everything I just said. So yeah, if we want to sort of move on. Paul's got a question. Paul Wheatley, also of the DPC. Paul, did you want to ask that, or shall I read it off the chat? I don't know if Paul is still with us.
Hi guys. Yeah, so I'm quite interested in the sort of quality assurance angle. As I kind of said in the chat, it's a sort of a classic challenge for members who are outsourcing, and it's certainly not just in the web archiving sphere, but more broadly, there's more third-party services coming in, and it's a real challenge for organisations to be able to outsource some of their work, but then still be able to verify that what they're getting back is complete and of a sufficient quality and so on, without spending so much effort on it that they may as well not have outsourced it in the first place. It's very easy to end up repeating the work in that. So I just wondered if you could say a bit more about what you guys can do to support members in doing that, in verifying the work that's been done.
I don't know if Tom's still there, but I'm sure Tom could probably have something to say on our work with.
I am. Yep.
Yep.
Hi. Yeah.
We work together a lot on QA, don't we? I don't know if you have a bit to say on that, about how that works.
Absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, the QA process it's very much, I mean, it starts, for us, it sort of starts before the website capture and finishes, obviously, after the content has been captured, through verification to right through in a sort of cycle, I suppose, to the next time we capture the website. It's been a collaborative process. I think the big thing, I mean, it is really difficult. We're constantly having discussions sort of internally and also with external stakeholders, including MirrorWeb, about how we QA in a way that's consistent, and it's particularly difficult, I think, with sample-based QA, which is the sort of the traditional go-to method of QAing websites, where essentially you're looking at a website, you're accessing it through a playback mechanism and verifying that the content's rendering correctly, the content is complete, and so on. And of course, at this scale, that can only ever really be a sample test. I think the big leap forward that we've had in recent months is the ability to be able to scale up verification using other sources such as crawl logs, and because the collection is now hosted in the cloud, including all of the QA aspects, we can actually do some quite heavy semi-automated sort of checking, sort of basically pinging of lots of resources that we know about in the web archive. So that gives us an extra degree of assurance that's incredibly useful for us.
Thank you for that, Tom. I'll add a bit more. Obviously, we've been working with Tom now for nearly a year around QA, and we can see that it is one of the biggest challenges. And so we've got an internal project going on here about trying to automate at least the first phase of it. When you've got a website, if it's missing a CSS or a JavaScript file or some particular bit of file, you load that up. It's very obvious, very immediately, and that will affect the pages across the entire site. So we're working on an automated process that automatically uses the archive in a browser, and then use the actual live site in the browser and takes a screenshot and compares them. And if there's any obvious differences, then that can be flagged or even possibly automatically patched before it hits our manual QA team. And that gives us the ability, gives us a head start and gives us quite a high fidelity archive before our manual QA team interrogate the site. And that'll only evolve. And that's certainly going to give us a sort of a good advantage over the traditional ways of having people manually check each page.
That's really interesting. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you. Any more questions? I don't know if we might have lost. We lost Sarah.
I'm still here. Sorry, I did say ask about other questions. Realized I was still muted. If there are no more questions from the floor at the moment, I did have a slightly different question, just to give you the opportunity from the MirrorWeb perspective, in terms of what you think are useful sort of approaches or information that clients can bring to you as kind of the basis of kind of the beginning of a good relationship. Sort of what it's sort of a give and take, and what you kind of look for from clients and from organizations.
I think that's a really good question and quite challenging. Thank you very much, Sarah. To be honest, we are relatively a young organisation in terms of where we are from a MirrorWeb perspective, in that obviously the National Archive is around about a year old, even though the business has been around developing the system for probably around 5 years. And because we're relatively new to the industry, it also was one of the things that I was talking to Sarah around in terms of the way that we were really impressed in the way that the conference is put together. I think the Young Conference is a really great idea, and collaboration is what it's all about. And we were actively wanting to ask the membership, or finding ways and methods to be able to find out from the membership, what the challenges are. And it's great for us to be able to talk about what we think the challenges are, but I'm sure that the feedback that we'll get next week will be invaluable to all of us, so that we can start to be much more informed, or much more in tune really with what the grassroots and the industry in principle, the challenges that are in front of them. And a realisation from our part in that, we all sort of work in our own little little clusters, and things like auto QA and some of the things that we're doing around Hadoop, and some of the things that Phil talks about that we want to give back to the community. We really want to try and accelerate that now over the next 12 to 18 months. And from a public sector or a government perspective, we're finding that actually the market is relatively mature in principle. Customers seem to be well informed. They understand exactly what they're looking for. It's actually on the other side, on the private sector, where the whole archiving concept actually needs a little bit of conceptualization, a little bit of education, a little bit of the usual scenario that I think a lot of these customers get bombarded with lots and lots of different technology these days, and it's very difficult to make an informed choice on what's the right thing to use. But we are finding that it's quickly catching up with the speed of everything that seems to be happening digitally at the moment. The market seems to actually be ahead of us, that there is a need state that's already there, and the products that we've got and the way that archiving in the future can be used, not only in the context of preservation and heritage and everything else that we probably hold true, but also in the way that we can probably start to think about how that can be used in both in a business perspective, to make sure that that information-driven enterprise, we can actually start to use this data in a really sort of effective way. And getting that across to our customer base at the moment is starting to become actually something that we meet pretty much, we're meeting sort of in the mid-ground, where people are actually, as soon as we start to talk about the archiving platform and what it can deliver, it opens up natural discussions around then what we can do with the data, how that can be used more effectively as a business tool. And they're the sort of challenges that we're facing on a daily basis. And probably a little bit of a reference back to what Jen was saying, that there is a perception that archiving of a service in principle could be expensive, and that may be because of the historical area of it being sort of database driven. But as soon as we've now found a cloud native solution and the storage on the cloud in real terms is relatively inexpensive, it's making sure that we can package that up and get through the barrier of being able to make sure that in principle one of our internal sort of vision is for us to be able to archive pretty much everything, whether that be a business account, whether that be a public account, or individuals. Why would we not want to take that further and being able to archive your own digital profile at some stage in the future? But again, maybe we're getting slightly ahead of ourselves, and I don't know if that answered your question, but hopefully it did in some way.
No, that's great. I think that's a very aspirational and very hopeful sort of place to wrap things up with. And I definitely look forward to picking up conversations again next week in Glasgow. So with that, I think I will hand over to the other Sarah Middleton, to wrap us up.
Thank you very much.
Thanks everybody. Thanks Phil and Tom, and for everybody for attending. That's all for today's session. As I said earlier, the episode will be posted on the DPC website probably by the end of the week, alongside maybe the links that to some of the things we talked about. Tom, maybe your requirements document will be interesting, I think. John's video, I think, and maybe your portal, Phil and Phil, you talked about. Perhaps we could share links to those bits and pieces. And we'll share the link to all of that by email later on in the week. Episode 2 of the Digital Preservation Futures webinar series will take place at the same time tomorrow, so that's 4 p.m. on Wednesday, the 6th of June. And in that episode, we'll begin hearing about future-proofing digital preservation with Archivum. Matthew Addis and Paula Keogh, who many of you will know, will talk about why it's important to act now and provide support on how to pull together a compelling business case that your stakeholders can't say no to. And they're going to close up by, similar to MirrorWeb, by talking about challenges and trends they see emerging in the next 5 years too. So I think that's all for today. Thank you again for joining us in the webinar, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon.